May the meditation of my heart and the words of my mouth be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Today's reading is the entire chapter 3 from the letter of James, and it's about the power of speech. James was the first bishop of Jerusalem, and tradition has it that he reigned for 30 years. And his life actually was defined by the power of speech, in that, according to tradition, what happened was on his last day on earth, Jewish leaders of the temple had came up to him and said, "You should stop talking about this Jesus fellow as though he's the Messiah. We want you to go out in front of everyone in front of the temple and to recant, to deny that Jesus is the Messiah." And so James said that he would do what they wanted. He went out in front of the temple, stood in front of a great crowd, but instead of denouncing Jesus, he proclaimed Jesus as the Messiah. And for this, the Jewish leaders stoned him to death. Today's reading was written long before that, of course, but in it we hear about the power of the tongue. James is speaking to Christian teachers who he says, you above all have to watch what you say, because the Christian community will be greatly influenced by what you say about this faith. The tongue, he argues, is the most powerful and most dangerous member of the body. He compares it to the rudder of a ship, and he also compares it to a forest fire. So it lights fires which spread from tree to tree to tree like the wildfires that we have out west. He even argues that the tongue is so strong that with rumors and lies it can poison the entire body. No one, he says, can truly control the tongue. Yet with this same tongue, we can say words of praise to God or denounce human beings who are made in the image of God. We must choose whether we can be a speaker of good or evil, he says. Now, James, if nothing else comes to you from this passage, it's that James is the king of mixed metaphors. Forest fires, rudders of ships, bridles, animals. Make up your mind, what is the tongue? And he also seems to be someone who is capable of great exaggeration, because he says one thing that you probably struck you that's just flat out impossible. He says that no one can control the tongue. But of course that's not true. All of us can control our tongues. It's one of the first things we teach our children is how to control their tongue. It's one of the most important things that you can learn. So how can James state so boldly that no one can control the tongue? The key is that when James speaks about the body, he's not speaking about an individual body. James was a bishop, and he's addressing teachers of the faith. His concern is with the welfare of the entire Christian community. So when he says body, he means the body of Christ, the community of believers. And this is why he speaks of the tongue as a forest fire. Because when rumors start in a community, they can spread from person to person to person in a way which is virtually uncontrollable. And it's almost impossible to know where the fire started, and even if you did, what you really need to know is where the fire is going, and that is completely unpredictable. Simply telling people to stop talking rarely works, because part of what makes a rumor mill so enticing is that you're saying something which isn't really allowed, at least in official speech. And in James' time, he says that these rumors were often motivated by envy and selfish interests. They can infect the body of the community and spread like a forest fire. These same forces are still at work in our society today. Throughout this pandemic, there has been a rumor mill which has traded in innuendo, false information, and conspiracy theories. History will probably remember this period as a time of enormous, fantastic scientific achievement, where vaccines, which usually take 4 to 10 years, were actually done in less than a year. It's like our equivalent of the moonshot. And yet, for a minority, this virus is a government-sponsored hoax. The vaccines, they say, contain microchips which will track us and be able to control us. And the entire vaccine program and vaccine passports and mandates are just a prelude to government fascism. Hospitals are picketed by unmasked protesters who may end up within COVID wards in the future. Politicians are drowned out at campaign stops by crowds that denounce them as fascists. Some have even thrown rocks at our Prime Minister and contend that he, like many world leaders like Joe Biden, are actually part of a worldwide pedophile ring. What James calls a forest fire is raging in our society right now, and most of us are at a loss about what to do about it. There have always been people who were interested in conspiracy theories. Back in the 90s, there was a popular television show, The X-Files, because back then conspiracy theories were usually held by people who believed in UFOs or paranormal activity, or maybe believed that the JFK assassination had been set up by the government. That was always at the margins, though. The conspiracy theorists were always at the margins. But now, they're right in the middle of the mainstream society. It seems that every street has people who are convinced that a horse deworming medicine is actually a better treatment for COVID-19 than vaccines which have been tried on millions of people. Medical science has bizarrely become an issue of personal opinion. How did we get here? How could normally rational people who take their kids to school every day and hold down jobs and pay bills embrace conspiracy theories? Part of the problem, of course, is that these theories spread on social media. And few of us go to social media to think. It's a form of entertainment, akin to gossiping over the back fence with a neighbor. From time immemorial, people have gossiped. Neighbors have traded suspicions and rumors about who is having an affair with who, and who just lost their job and doesn't want anybody to know about it, and who's selling their house for too much or too little. That kind of gossip doesn't trade on certainties. It's filled with innuendos and guesses. It's the same sort of talk that people engage in when they talk about sports. The beauty of sports is that no one really knows what's going to happen. The only sure thing in sports is that the Leafs will not win the Stanley Cup. Aside from that, the entire field is open to speculation. And it doesn't matter if you're right or you're wrong. If you guess point spreads and who's going to win and who's going to get traded and you're wrong on all of that, next year, your friends will still talk to you. They don't care that you were wrong any more than the gossiping that happens over the fence. It matters that you were wrong about things because it's not about accuracy when we're talking like that. We're engaging our social mind, and our social mind cares about connections between people and maintaining relationships. It's not that interested in whether the information is accurate. And those kinds of informal social networks were the inspiration for social media. It was started out as a casual way to keep up with what was going on with people you might have lost touch with, old high school buddies or neighbors who had moved away. It didn't seem like it required fact-checking any more than those back fence discussions ever did. But social media has morphed into something else. On the one hand, corporations, terrorists, and other large entities have realized that it provides a degree of access to people which is more targeted than radio or television could ever hope for. On the personal level, the fact that it still looks and feels like gossip means that we don't use our rational minds when we get onto social media. We go to Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and Twitter to relax, to scroll through. No one takes notes when they're looking at TikTok videos. That would be silly. The part of our minds that we use when we go to university, where we do take notes, where we think through, is that true? And we cross-check facts and figures. That's simply not applicable when we're looking at social media. And our desire to create social connections by endorsing and spreading rumors is still in place and aided and embedded by the algorithms which now govern these programs. This is the modern version of the uncontrollable tongue that James is speaking about. And no dictator in the world has ever been able to conquer gossip. It always survives, even if it's driven deep underground. And that poses a major problem when scientific information coming through social media is patently false, yet we accept it anyway. During the pandemic, a couple of months after the vaccine started to roll out, I received an email, as did ministers all over the city, saying that night the mayor of Toronto wanted to have a talk with us. And we didn't know what it was about, so I logged on along with about 60 other faith leaders. There were imams and rabbis and Christian leaders like myself. And it turned out that the mayor wanted to find out how we as religious leaders could encourage our congregants and followers to get vaccinated. And the religious leaders responded basically with two answers. One side said, well, our congregants want to get vaccinated. The only problem is they're not sure where to get it, because back then it wasn't so obvious where to get vaccinated or how to sign up. But then the other side was, you know what? Our people don't want to get vaccinated because on WhatsApp, they're hearing that the vaccines aren't safe. And Mayor Tory, that's where you need to go. You need to advertise not in bus shelters and on TV. You need to get into WhatsApp, because Auntie from the old country is telling people here that it's not safe, and they trust her because they know her a lot better than they know you. So what can be done? Well, like us, James the Apostle was confronted by a community where rumors and misinformation had spread like a forest fire. It seemed to be everywhere at once. He addresses this part of his letter to teachers, who he says should be extra careful in what they say. He means spiritual teachers, those who are spreading the word about Christianity. And today, in a world where Christianity is largely misunderstood, I think all of us who see the loving, compassionate side of Christianity qualify as teachers. Not just in what we say, but also in what we do, which for James is always the key proof of where we really stand. James ends this chapter of his letter by speaking about the wisdom that comes from above, from God. It sounds utterly different from the envy and anger that fuels those forest fires of gossip. He says, the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. James knows that this kind of wisdom can take root in people. This is the saving grace that comes from God and that showed up in person as Jesus. Wisdom begins with humility, with the recognition that our quick answers and surmises are often incorrect. Wisdom sees the world as much more richly mysterious and wonderful for all of that. Out of that humility comes patience and understanding and compassion too. For if I recognize that I do not fully understand what's going on in me, I shouldn't claim to fully understand what's going on in you. The psalm we heard Joyce read us today with the backing of the choir is a wisdom psalm. It presents a beautiful vision of the world. It begins in the heavens and slowly makes its way down to earth towards human beings. It suggests that there's an overall order to the world which we only dimly understand, but which we can trust in. That God has made it all good if only we could see it or hear it. The psalm begins with those strange lines about how day speaks to day and night shares knowledge with night. Their voice goes out through all the earth and their words to the end of the world. These lines seem nonsensical to us. How can the day have a conversation with the coming day or the night share information with the next night? The mystery of it is the point. We human beings are part of something much bigger than ourselves, which we did not invent, and we will probably never understand fully. Yet we are cared for by God's universe. James is suggesting that his teachers welcome wisdom into their hearts, and through that become springs of nourishing spiritual water for others. If we can become patient and compassionate when we understand that we don't entirely know what's going on, then we can help those who are living in fear and anger. None of us really know why people adopt conspiracy theories. There are likely many reasons more emotional than intellectual. Conspiracy theories rarely project a message of love and compassion. Instead, they imagine monsters. And that suggests that deep down there are wounds that need healing that existed before the conspiracy theory came about. What is clear is that these alternate views of reality create a sense of empowerment and community. The hecklers who have been drowning out politicians come in groups. They find the membership in a society of fellow believers very comforting. But that desire for community suggests that the emotional root is one of loneliness and a sense of being powerless. Like a child who is abused by a parent who they should be able to trust. And perhaps that is why this theory of politicians being pedophiles is taken off. It feels true to them, even if it isn't. In his letter, James suggests that Christian teachers adopt a stance of understanding, not rejection. Through our compassionate acts, we can be examples of another way of dealing with this mysterious universe. We can respond with a sense of awe towards the universe and compassion towards other fellow confused humans. We can recognize that we do not fully know why others have adopted alternate realities, motivated by fear and anger. But instead of responding with rejection, perhaps we could try patience. That beneath the slogans and the heckling, there are people who are hurting, who are lonely, who feel powerless. So instead of rejecting them as write-offs or canceling them, perhaps we could keep an open mind and a heart. If you know someone who has gone down one of these rabbit holes, I think James would recommend that you don't shun them, but model compassion. Show your faith in works of patience. If the key problem is loneliness and fear, then the answer is love and inclusion. Will they suddenly drop their rocks and stop protesting? No, not right away. But when all of this is over, they may remember that you kept talking to them, even when you disagreed with them most. They may remember those who kept in touch, even when they got sick with a disease that they had been so sure didn't really exist. And that may be what helps them bridle their tongue and find hope again. Amen.